Hello and welcome back to the Becoming Relentless podcast. I am your host, Noa McCabe, and we are back after a little hiatus. It is so great to see everybody here. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have a very special guest back on the podcast again today. I am joined by Mr. Matt Cusano. Hello, welcome back.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Going very well. I'm super, super stoked for this. We are going to be diving into more of the functional health side, the podcast that we did previous. If you guys haven't already, please go back and listen to Matt and I's previous podcast because we really went deep into the female side of health, competitors. We touched on many different subjects there. So today, I feel like this is going to be building off of that podcast and exploring a little bit deeper into more of the functional health side of things that we see as coaches. So make sure you guys have your notepads ready. There's going to be a lot of value in this one. I can already tell. All right. So Matt, where would you like to start?
Um, entirely up to you, if you want to kind of take the lead. I know you had mentioned that you had some prior discussions with a client, was it that you
Mhm.
wanted to kind of address in here, or maybe it was just past Q&As that you wanted to kind of dive deeper on from here. So
Yeah.
we can certainly start there and see where the information takes us.
Okay, perfect. I'd love that. So previously, I did mention, I think on our previous podcast, and I actually had this athlete come to you guys. I've had two athletes now come to Rise
Oh, great.
because, yeah. But one of the athletes that I had spoken with you about, she was experiencing digestive issues, but it couldn't be pinpointed down to like one root cause. So sometimes, a lot of the time when my athletes come in, typically I do see digestive issues because the way that we live, our lifestyle, our modern day lifestyle is very stressful. We've discussed this, but typically it's like, okay, let's manage stress, let's get on a routine. Once we find the foods that digest well for them, they're calm when they're eating, like more of the behavior and lifestyle practices. Some of those issues like the bloating, like constipation or burping, like those will go away in a sense. But this one athlete that I had, I tried everything that I knew that I could do, like in my wheelhouse with her. And she was so patient with me. But finally, I said, you know what? I think we need to get tested. We need to go the route of getting a full panel done, GI mapping done, and really dive into that side of things because I knew I was like, there's an issue that needs fixed that I can't do on my own here. So I sent her
Yeah,
to you guys, and y'all have set her up with a protocol. Um,
very cool.
yeah. So yeah, in any point there, you can take it any direction. But mostly what I wanted to, I guess, emphasize here is like for the general population, like we might see some of these digestive issues manifesting, but
Yeah,
not necessarily know like, is this a true GI issue or is it a lifestyle issue?
sure.
What are some ways that you've found to distinguish these?
So I think, we can both agree that most GI issues do inherently have a lifestyle component to them. Does that mean that changing their lifestyle is going to fix everything? Maybe, maybe not.
Hmm.
There's a lot of talk these days in the functional medicine community about, you know, whether or not intensive testing and protocols are really needed. Um,
Right.
Certain coaches believe that none of it is needed, and all you have to do is work on their mental health and work on their mindsets and work on creating better habits. And that, could certainly be true. And that could certainly help a lot of their symptoms subside. But one thing we do have to keep in mind is that if someone has the presence of infections,
Hmm.
there's no amount of mental health work that's going to get rid of infections.
Right.
So we have to separate symptoms from like the actual problem. Claiming that fixing your mental health cures SIBO is technically false. That, fixing your mental health doesn't get rid of an infection. Fixing your mental health could cure your symptoms such as constipation, bloating, heartburn. So it's helped the symptoms, but we need to be very cautious in saying you can cure SIBO or cure H. pylori or cure a parasite by going to a therapist.
Yep.
Um,
That sounds like a
However,
real hook. Like, that sounds like a hook that I would hear on social media, like, "Changing your mental health will cure your SIBO." Like
yeah, don't waste your time doing testing
Yeah.
and protocols. Just work with a mindset coach.
Right.
Um, I think, and we always know in fitness that there's always extremes like this. The argument of calories in versus calories out,
Mhm.
and whether or not hormones matter. There's always just big extremes in every discussion. And there's about half truths to everything. They're both right. Calories matter, hormones matter.
Yep.
Mental health does matter a lot for gut issues. Um, I think it's important that we say, so one thing I talk to all my specialists about at the clinic, whether they're HRT specialists, functional specialists, we've kind of established a tier system
Mhm.
of recommendations and actions that we take. And there's always a couple thoughts that go into that tier system, just like a coach would have. Like, number one, saving people money, saving people time, not doing unnecessary testing, not doing
Yep.
unnecessary protocols. At the same time, you could make the exact same argument by not doing the testing, by not doing the protocol. Have you just wasted more of their time? Possibly. So it can go either way.
Right.
Um, but I think every coach, when someone comes to them with dysfunction, we should go after the low hanging fruit items. Okay, tell me about your sleep. Tell me about your stress. Let's dive into, mental health, mindset. Tell me about your current diet. All those things can play into it. And when we say diet, most people think automatically their food choices.
Right.
And sure, that is a big part of dieting, but with regards to, optimizing digestive function, there's a lot of other aspects to that. You could be choosing all the right foods and, be technically in the right macro range, in the right calorie range. But if you're eating every 2 hours, you are actually stressing your gut more because your migrating motor complex never gets a break. You haven't even digested the previous meal, and now you're just adding more food particles and waste to your GI tract. So, something as simple as eating 6 meals a day could be what's causing your issues, or something as simple as rushing and wolfing down that food
Mhm.
in 2 minutes because you're on a break from work, and you're not supposed to be eating, stuff like that, which we've all been
Yeah,
guilty
those
of,
are huge.
especially
Yep.
as competitors. Something as simple as drinking a ton of fluids after every bite and basically washing down that food, that washes away all of your digestive enzymes and stomach acids. So now you're not breaking down that food.
I used to
So,
do that. I learned
what's
my
that?
I used to do that, learned my lesson the hard way.
Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause
yeah, yeah,
I would
totally.
get so bloated, it would sit in your stomach, you felt heavy, and then I
Yeah,
realized, "Why am I drinking, all this water with my meals?" Like, sips are
yeah.
fine, but just the gulping, like, I used to gulp down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
even
I used
that.
to treat it like I was swallowing pills, like the
Mhm.
big piece of chicken, I'm just like
Yeah.
washing it down. Um, so those are all aspects of our, diet that most people don't think about when we say, tell me about your diet.
Right.
I've also met a lot of people who have joined in on the intermittent fasting trend, thinking that that's going to help them. But then what they don't
Right.
realize is, okay, you fast for the first half of the day, but then you squeezed in all your meals in the second half of the day, shooting yourself in the foot. You just made matters worse.
Yep.
So meal spacing, taking your time to chew your food, all those things play into it. And I don't think a lot of people think about that when we talk about, tell me about your diet and stuff like that.
Right.
So I think there's tons of low hanging fruit options that we should be looking at first.
Mhm.
And if we've done all those changes, exhausted all those options, and seen zero improvements, that's when it's like, okay, maybe we should look into a little bit of supplementation. That would kind of be tier two.
Mhm.
Can we get this fixed with a little bit of support? If that's still not improving things, last tier would be comprehensive testing,
Yep.
diving into a protocol, maybe even connecting with a specialist to assist in that protocol to make sure it's bulletproof, you know?
Right. No, I completely agree. I think that those tiers are important. I'm glad you laid that out for people because I've also seen, some coaches get new athletes, immediately put them into a protocol, which
Mhm,
I can see the benefits of that. And
mhm,
also, if that's not what that person needs, you could be spinning your wheels in a sense. So I like that tier where it's like, okay, let's address just the easy, the low hanging fruit, the stuff that like we all have control over. And then
yeah,
from there, we can build off of it with the supplements. And then, if things are still not changing, that's when, okay, let's do the testing. But, comprehensive testing, especially for functional health, can be really expensive. So for a
sure.
lot of people, like for that to be almost like the last option,
Mhm,
I kind of wonder if maybe in the future there's ways that we can provide testing that isn't such a big barrier to entry for more of the general population. Because my experience with competitors is they're willing to do what it takes. They'll do the testing, they'll spend the money, but sometimes for your average mom or working person, like they don't necessarily want to spend that money and do that testing and then do a strict protocol. So
totally. I think too, there's a couple benefits of doing it that way, especially if it's a new client.
mhm.
You're still building their trust.
Yep.
And so if you just hammer them with thousands of dollars of diagnostic testing, this vigorous protocol that they've never done before, you've barely even given them enough information as to why they're doing all these things and
Mhm.
how it connects to their goals or their dysfunction. That's probably not going to be a conducive long-term relationship.
Right.
Whereas if you explain to them from the start, it could be this, it could be something simple. We're going to take a very slow and steady approach. They probably appreciate that you're trying to save them money. They appreciate that you're not going to the most extreme scenario right off the bat. So that's going to build their trust in you. And then also, let's say you've dedicated 6 weeks and haven't seen progress. They've now bought into the need for testing.
Yep.
We have exhausted all of our options together, and we both agree the next step is testing. You have it, you're not telling them at this point, they're ready for it.
Right.
And so I just
Yep.
think that creates a smoother, more trusting relationship between coach and client too, is knowing that like the coach is being very rational with these choices and there's no guesswork, there's no extreme biases towards anything. It's just this makes the most sense step by step.
Yep. What it reminds me of is I think they say this in like the medical field, like a zebra is a zebra, or
Yeah,
is that the saying? But like it's usually whatever the simplest, like most obvious answer is, like that's usually what it is. And I think sometimes as well, especially because functional health has become more pertinent in at least I see it, like maybe it's just my social media, I'm not sure, but I just see a lot more like functional health coaches, functional health information. It's not, I don't want to call it a fad because I don't think it's a fad. I think it's cool that people are focusing on health, but it seems to be trendy to talk about it. And then we get into the weeds with like all of a sudden people are connecting dots where there shouldn't be connection. Um,
sure.
and so I think it's helpful for us to almost lay out that like, hey, if we can go through this step by step and look at the most simple things first, that might actually improve and change more than getting all of this other stuff done would.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
not only that, but even if you do have to do the testing, even if you do have the worst possible GI case we've ever seen, and you're needing a 6 month vigorous protocol, guess what? All those low hanging fruit option items still have to happen.
yep,
So it's not like we lost time by reducing their stress and fixing their diet habits.
right,
That all had to happen anyways. It was part of the equation. So just starting there first, it creates the foundation of a healing body, you
Mhm.
know? But to your point, I do agree that it's trending, the discussion of functional medicine. It definitely was starting, a little bit before this, but I think since 2020,
Mhm.
um, the trust around science, the government, and healthcare in general in Western civilization, the trust has declined. And people have learned that they need to become their own biggest health advocates.
Yep.
And so I think that's where this big demand for knowledge and change has come from, taking things into our own hands as individuals. Um, I think we can both agree that every year we see disease and dysfunction increasing,
Yeah.
whether that's due to vaccines or the pesticides and toxic items in our food supply, whether that's due to just the demands that society has put on us in the workforce of being
Mhm.
overworked and under rested and underfed. All these things, are putting us down that path of disease and dysfunction more. And I think people are slowly waking up to that. That's kind of been, I would say, the beauty or benefit of social media and podcasts and
Right.
YouTube is the spreading of a lot more information. Of course, the caveat to that is this sometimes spreading of misinformation, or like we said,
Right.
even if it's a half truth, now they have this kind of skewed view on what they need to do or what might be wrong. And so there's not enough context. We live in this world of where so everything on social media has to be fast.
Yeah.
We're talking 15 to 40-second clips,
Yep.
and you're supposed to now like understand how the human body works in 40 seconds. So it's very quick information that could possibly be true, but needs a lot of context behind it.
Yep.
And unfortunately, a lot of, I guess you could say, influencers don't have that context.
Right, they don't go into the nuance that's necessary, it's more just like, how dramatic can I make this point and get people hooked so that they buy from me? Yeah, that's totally what I've noticed. Um, 2 things in there that I really like what you said, but you talked about, like, the toxins in our environment, um, and I think that that might be an important point to go into, as well as just, like, how GI issues start and then how that snowball affects into different areas. So,
Sure.
first, like, just addressing the environmental toxins, and also I think you called it, like, toxic load. Can you explain a little bit more about, like, what that means for the everyday person? Like, what is a toxic load? What is that?
Yeah, so the term toxic load basically means um abuse on the body coming in the form of certain items that are poisonous or toxic. This could be the overconsumption of certain heavy metals, mercury, lead, things like that. That can be in our water supply, can be in certain vaccines that we know for a fact. Um, can even be in some food supplies and other medications. Um, I also know that, especially in women's care products, there's a
Mhm.
lot of potential toxins, whether we're talking about hair care, skin care. So there's a lot of toxins that we put on our body or in our body every day. Detergents, it can have these toxins. Scented candles and Febreze and all that
Mhm.
crap is just basically filling the air of our house with certain toxins. There's more common, more evasive ones, such as mold toxicity.
Mhm.
If our basement gets flooded, or our house endured a hurricane and now the roof ended up having some damage, mold can develop, and we are now breathing in that toxic mold exposure every single day, and we're living in it. And that exposure to those toxins creates more added stress on the body, and it creates an overactive immune system, which is essentially the precursor to autoimmune.
Yep.
And it just puts our body in this chronic fight or flight state, essentially. The same is true with Lyme disease. Lyme disease is a very common situation that happens due to tick bites. And
Mhm.
so, if we see this very often with people who are avid hikers, or it's actually very common with equestrian riders, people who ride through trails on
Right.
horses, bike riding through trails, stuff like that. They may never even know that they got a tick bite, and then years later, their body is just shutting down, autoimmune diseases through the roof. And it's because they've had this overbearing toxic load
Mhm.
from Lyme disease that they haven't even known about. Um,
Is Lyme disease like a slow infection? Is
so it can be,
Mhm.
it can take, um take years to really, show, like, full symptoms and dysfunction. However, I'd say most people start to notice changes pretty quickly
Okay.
when their body experiences that toxic load.
Mhm.
Um, the problem is that society has normalized disease and dysfunction for us so much. Most of us, especially adults, are not in tune enough with our body to notice the difference.
Okay.
As we get into our
Mhm.
30s and we start feeling more fatigued and we start gaining psoriasis on our face and our sex drive is crashed and our sleep is poor, could that be Lyme disease? Yes. Could that just be everything that's happening in 2024 and the fact that, we're not making enough money to support our wife and 2 kids and all these things? Yes. So it's very hard to determine,
Right.
you know, what's happening to me. And most of us are just so caught up in our lives that we're just like, fuck, I'm just getting older. I'm feeling like shit. And that just is what it is. So I think that plays into it a lot too.
So for like, let's say there's an everyday person, maybe they live in a big city, and they commute to work. So like their toxic load would be like, okay, their daily commute to work, like there's pollution from
Sure.
the traffic. They drink out of like plastic water bottles.
Yes.
They
Well,
do their makeup, like
makeup
they
and hair care products,
yep, like food
stuff
is
like that.
non-organic, like pesticide covered, like
Pesticides,
yeah,
glyphosate, those types of toxic
exactly. Like so
foods.
that to me that's just like almost an everyday person. Like you could say like that is your average person is experiencing that sort of exposure. So are there again like with reducing toxic load, how, how would somebody go about that without feeling overwhelmed? Because I know, like, even for myself, when I started learning about it, like, okay, switching over all my skincare, all my makeup, all my products to like the clean sources, even that was difficult because brands will market as like clean, even though it's not actually non toxic. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's like, to me, it just seems like if somebody's hearing about this for the first time and they're like, "I wanna reduce my toxic load," like, that's something I want to do, or they wanna have a
Yeah.
choice at least in, like, what they expose themselves to, like, where
Sure.
would they even start?
Yeah. So, you have a great point. Like, honestly, living in America these days, we're all burdened with some level of toxic load, whether it's our food, water supply, detergent, chemicals that we're using, you name it. Um, so I would say, start out where you can and understand that there's gonna be uncontrollables. It's kind of
Mhm.
like the same idea that I talk to people about stress in general. And toxic load is a stressor at the end of the day.
Yep.
And so when I talk to people about stress mitigation, I differentiate uncontrollable stressors from controllable stressors. Uncontrollable stressors are things like job, family, kids. We can't change that. We're not just going to dip and leave all those things tomorrow. Some people might, but
Hopefully, you
most
don't.
people won't. And so we consider those uncontrollable stressors, meaning don't worry about them. Those you can't control, so don't let that impact you. Controllable stressors, however, are day to day actions and choices. caffeine and stimulants, alcohol, exercise, cardio, food intake, sleep intake,
Yep.
water intake. These are things in our control. And the same would be true with like so certain toxins, you could invest into really good water filtration systems. There's a lot of research you can do about your local area's water supply
Mhm.
and see if there's been toxic spills, contaminations. They do have to admit to these things, but they don't get publicized. So you actually have to do your research about your local county and stuff and find
Oh,
out what the
interesting.
water supply is like,
Yeah.
and then you can kind of decide from there, do I need advanced filtration systems, stuff like that. With
Mhm.
regards to, hair care and beauty care products, that one's tough because we know that there's so many loopholes in the marketing and what they're allowed to put on a label. Like they can say all natural, free of all these things, and it's not.
Yeah.
So that is really tough. And the only thing we can do, kind of like the same idea with like fitness, there's good coaches and bad coaches. You kind of have to like siphon through it, find information that you can really trust, and probably experiment with a couple brands and see if you notice a difference there. But, doing just a good bit of research and, working through the bullshit for lack of a better
Right.
term.
Yep.
Same being true with food. Food is hard as well because they lie about everything on food
Yeah.
labels. And now we're finding out that even places like Whole Foods is sometimes lying to us and, having not the best products. But at the end of the day, doing what we can, if we can get organic, if we can avoid, processed foods, and things with extremely high, artificials, gluten, and stuff like that, that's all going to help.
Yeah.
It's tough too in modern day life because we're all so busy. And so a lot of people don't have the money to get grass fed protein, so animal sources and, or organic fruit and vegetables. That is expensive. And it's also really hard to say, oh, well, everyone should just be making their own sourdough bread. Like who the fuck has time for that? Very few people. So it's a tough equation that we've all been put in. We're all victims of this epidemic that's happening in the United States.
Yeah, just
Uh, but doing the best you can, doing your research, and the same idea with stress. The human body doesn't singularize stressors. It's an entire bucket of stress that's overflowing. So we could kind of use the same analogy with toxic load. Are you going to get rid of every toxic thing from your life? No, probably not. But if you could cut your toxic load in half by fixing your water supply and getting rid of this makeup, that's progress. And now you've reduced that stress on your body.
mhm.
So I would say, don't look for perfection, just look for improvements and seeing where you can maybe move away from some of those things.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I think that's incredibly important to reiterate, like, it's not about perfectly eliminating everything because you won't. There's gonna be a
No,
degree of toxicity in your life forever, but I think what's most important is, like, each individual deciding, like, where do they wanna make change and start to progress in that direction. Like, I think for me, first was like, okay, skincare and hair care. And then it was like, okay, air purification, because my allergies in Texas were terrible. And I was like, I can't suffer like this. So I got one of those air purifiers for my apartment. Problem solved. Great. Like now I can work
yeah,
from home and not feel like I'm congested all the time. And it's just step by step. Like, is my water perfect? Probably not. I probably need some water filtration, but that's the next step. That's something that I can
sure,
save for and install and whatever. But it
sure.
is just like one thing at a time. Like, where can you improve and do that? Because even that is a step in the right direction.
Exactly. And when we see people who deal with disease and dysfunction, it wasn't just their water supply. That was
Right.
the straw that broke the camel's back, but it was the fact that they also had all these other stressors in their lives.
Yeah.
Same with this is a very common topic in the bikini and overall female competitor world is breast implant illness.
Yep.
I don't know how much you've dealt with that with your clients, but I've noticed it as a very popular topic in the competitor realm.
Mhm.
But I have yet to meet a woman who was diagnosed with breast implant illness who also didn't have lifetime trauma, other issues, GI issues, toxicity issues, um, mental health issues, gym addiction, steroid addiction. Like there was
Right.
actually 6 things wrong with them, not just
It wasn't just
the
the
breast
one.
implants.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
I think people need to start looking at these abusers on their body as a whole versus singular. It's
Right.
not just one thing.
Right. And that's a conversation that I've absolutely had as well because people are like, well, you bodybuild and you use PEDs, but you're telling us not to drink alcohol. Like, you're a hypocrite for that. And I'm like, I'm choosing, I'm making a choice to put things into my body and not put other things into my body. And like, that's my free choice. But
Yeah,
to me, I mean, I say it all the time, but like education is empowerment. Like the more that you know about the choices that you're making and like what is actually happening in your body, the better. And like for me, I'm choosing to compete and I want to do it in a certain way. And so, yes, I am going to use PEDs and no, I'm not going to drink alcohol, but that doesn't mean that everyone has to do the same. It's just, do
sure.
you know what that alcohol is doing to you?
Sure. You're also a professional athlete. So, like,
Yes.
yeah, you're gonna do what it takes to be successful in your professional career versus going out to get laid on a Friday night and getting wasted. And you're choosing to a lot of people do both. There's a lot of people taking PEDs and drinking. And so you're limiting your toxic load. It's not that you're saying steroids are better than alcohol. It's that you're literally saying, this is my career. So I'm choosing not to add toxicity by doing other things.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly the point. It's like you have that choice, and other people do too, like, whether you're general pop or your competitor, like, you can make these choices that can help lower that toxic load, so just having the information and making a considered choice, I think is important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I
So
think that can kind of segue into your second question about like
yeah.
how GI issues typically start.
Yeah, like, where do they even
So
start?
there, there's definitely, a few different drivers of GI issues, but it's safe to say that 90% of the time it's coming from chronically high stress. And we have to think of stress as not perceived stress, but abuse on the body. So those same toxic load categories could be the driver of gut issues. And then the same could be true for trauma. The same could be true for overtraining and under eating, such as a
Mhm.
competitor does. All those things can lead to that. And what we have to understand is that GI issues are a natural adaptation to survival, just like a lot of other dysfunction in our body is, whether we're talking about high blood pressure, high blood sugar, anxiety, sleep issues, low sex drive and low sex hormones, thyroid dysfunction. These are all actually adaptations for survival that the body does naturally.
Mhm.
And when we understand how the body perceives stress as a threat on survival, we understand why the body is doing these things. And then we can kind of reverse it from there. But with regards to GI issues, we have to think of this as the body is viewing everything as a threat on survival. So when your body is chronically stressed and it activates that fight or flight response, one of the very first adaptations that happens is the body shuts down blood flow to the gut and prioritizes blood flow to the brain and the limbs. That's to support fighting or fleeing the situation. And most athletes will notice that's what's happening when you're getting a pump in the gym.
Mhm.
Blood flow has shifted from your gut towards your biceps or to your quads or wherever you're training, and that means digestion has halted. You are not absorbing nutrients during that time. Most of the functions of the GI tract have shut down because of that lack of blood flow. So we're not producing bile to help with fat absorption. We're not producing enough enzymes and stomach acid to help break down proteins and carbs and different food particles. Now we have nutrient malabsorption, and now we're also not digesting properly. Hence why most competitors get constipated in prep. It's because of that fight or flight response. So now that you're not clearing out waste, that waste just sits and festers in your gut, and that's what turns into infections. So that's the snowball effect. It
Mhm.
typically starts with a fight or flight response that doesn't go away, it's chronic. And then we develop infections or imbalances in our gut microbiome. We develop leaky gut, which then all leads to inflammatory responses to foods,
Yep.
more toxic load, um, hormone imbalances, thyroid dysfunction, all the dysregulation then kind of snowballs from there. So that's the typical snowball effect we see. And most competitors who have GI issues can probably resonate with that snowball effect. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what happened, you know?
Yeah.
And then when we think about adding in oral PEDs, oral medications, most oral medications and especially methylated steroids are going to really impact our production of stomach acid, bile, and enzymes.
Yeah.
So now our food absorption is even worse, slowing down digestion even more, stressing out the liver, impacting our detox process. So all that's getting impacted as we drive up PEDs and drive up stress and prep. So it is
The
truly the
stimulus just
perfect
keeps
storm.
going. Yeah.
And by the end of prep, you're going to be fucked up.
Yep. And then that is also when we start to see the digestive issues come out to play is like post show, right? Is when they really hit full force because then people are going out, they're eating more,
Yeah,
and it's just a disaster. Yep.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people won't even notice because their diet is so restrictive in prep that they're just avoiding anything that drives inflammation or causes more issues. But as soon as the prep is over with, it's like that mask gets unveiled
Mhm.
and now they're just inflamed as hell, which stresses them out more because they've gained 20 pounds in a day.
Right.
And now they're going back to the gym, causing more stress,
Just
making matters worse, you know?
digging themselves into a hole, right? Which is it speaks to why it is so important post show to reverse properly, take care of your health,
Terrible. Yeah,
and I used to be somebody who was like, "Oh, you can enjoy a day or two, like this and that." Now it's like, nope, post show is very, very important. Have a meal out with your family or your friends. That's
right.
fine, but we're not going to eat till we're sick. We're not going to go crazy for a week. You can still reverse because if you can just reverse for the 6 weeks and get yourself out of that spot, oh,
Yeah,
you'll be great. The rest of your off season, have free meals, enjoy, but it's not just for, like, the aesthetic purposes, it's really for your health.
your health, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sets up the opportunity to have a successful growth phase and off season is so dependent on that reverse. 5 days will ruin your entire off season, you know? If you cheat for 5 days straight, your off season is fucked. You've already fucked yourself unless you now do a repair process before that off season.
Yep.
But if you gain 30 pounds in a week, how are you planning on doing a growth phase?
Yeah.
You're fat, dude. Like, you just made yourself fat and inflamed. You're not absorbing food. You're definitely not growing muscle. So you basically shot yourself in the foot all to get in a couple meals that you would have gotten in anyways if you were just a little bit more patient. And I'll be honest, I for the past few years, I have been heavily blaming friends and support systems because it's the friends that buy you the 10-pound cookies
Mhm.
and take you out to dinner and make the bucket list of we're going to go get shit faced and do this, this, and this after your show. I know you think that that's being a great friend and being supportive, but you're actually fucking them like 100%,
Yeah.
making matters so much worse for them by enabling them with all those temptations and
Yeah,
stuff.
and
That's not what they need.
it's really hard, like, as a competitor, I think we have to start having those conversations with your friends, with your family that like, "Hey, yes, I would love to be part of these festivities and hang out with you and go out to eat." Like, I want to be present for that, but I have to get through this reverse. I have to take care of my health. Like, just setting boundaries and having conversations beforehand is extremely important, and it is difficult. Like, I think most people also lack having those boundaries and lack the ability to have the harder conversations because they don't want to let their friends down or whatever, but when it comes to looking at the big picture, if you're a competitor and you're serious about the sport, then you need to make sure the boundaries are in place that, like, you're not gonna go out and eat pizza and cookies, the night after your show. You're just not. You can go out to dinner and enjoy the time with your friends and family and be present with them and make
Right.
memories, but, like, let's not make it about the food. Like,
Right.
yeah, food does not have to be celebratory, but I think that that's also, like, a societal thing, is, like, everything that we celebrate is with food.
Totally.
So
Totally true. I think too that there's definitely arguments to be made that the prep experience can sometimes drive people to be more food focused and quite honestly create a a food and mental health issue that wasn't there previously. You know, it's almost an eating disorder that prep brought on.
Mhm,
Um, and we also want to be careful not to create all these fears of foods where
right.
people like never eat something again. That again, it goes into context and not allowing there to be extremes, but explaining to them of, we have been restrictive. We need to, slowly reintroduce things post show, and really combat inflammatory response and, utilize your really good insulin sensitivity that you have right now and just focus on recovery. That friend who wants to take you out to dinner, great. Can it wait till next weekend? Like, can it wait 7 days?
Yeah.
That will make all the difference. Just giving it those 7 days to recover first. Everyone is like acting like it's their last supper. Like they're not going to have next week, you know? You don't have to do that.
Right.
It just space it out.
I think it's a lot. I see it a lot with, newer competitors or maybe,
Sure.
inexperienced competitors, right? Or people
Sure.
who maybe are in the sport for, more, like, superficial reasons.
Sure.
I used to say, like, right and wrong reasons. I don't know if there's such a thing as, like, a wrong reason, but superficial
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
As far as, like, post-show goes as well, I find, like, it can swing both ways. So there's people who just, they're so done with dieting. They want to have all the freedom. They don't want to track all the foods. And then sometimes I also see, like you were saying, almost the disordered eating patterns come up where, they're too scared to eat anything that was off plan. And they only limit themselves to these certain prep foods that they have because they have this idea that it's like those are the good foods. But um, I've been working to try and help competitors overcome that as well because in the end, like, having a diverse diet is way more
Very
important. Yeah,
Yeah.
to have a healthy microbiome, and I've been getting more into, like, the microbiome health. I think one of the first things I sent you, in our earlier emails was, like, I had been r looking at this study of, microbiome diversity and that even like cancer cells have their own unique microbiome. And it's
Mhm.
incredible because some people who develop cancer, if they have a healthy gut microbiome and the cancer's microbiome is like a certain way, they're more likely to respond positively to treatments.
Sure.
And I don't remember all the ins and outs of the study, but I just found that so fascinating. And it's something that hits home for me because I have family members who have battled cancer multiple times. And I know that their diets are super diverse and, like, rich in nutrients like fruits, vegetables, fibers, and so it was kind of cool to see a study almost confirm what I'd seen anecdotally, and also
Absolutely.
it it blew my mind how incredible and important the gut microbiome really is. Like, it is
Mhm.
so, so crucial. Um That was a little bit of a tangent, but I
No, no, I mean, you're 100% right. For centuries, yeah, dating back to, um, Greek mythology and stuff, they talked about how all disease starts in the gut. So it's been known. And
yeah,
in the terms of, cancer and stuff, majority of our immune system is derived from our gut. So if our immune system is compromised, how can we fight off anything effectively? And if there's
yeah.
chronic oxidative stress, that's going to put us at higher risk factors for just about every type of disease, be it cancer or otherwise. um I've definitely helped a few different people who were battling cancer over the years, and there's a lot of different trains of thought in regards to food strategies that can be utilized. There's tons of research showing that cancer basically feeds off of carbohydrates.
Mhm,
And so the idea of going to, a lower carbohydrate diet or maybe even a carnivore diet can potentially reduce growth potential of cancer cells. There's, plenty of research coming out now that, you know, long-term fasting supports autophagy, and
mhm,
autophagy is basically the process of the body kind of eating away, cleaning itself up. And so to a certain degree, that is catabolic on our muscles, but it could also be catabolic on the cancer cells and other, detrimental things inside our body. So those are all tactics. I wouldn't say necessarily to cure or prevent, but to possibly combat the increasing growth
mhm.
and slow things down during treatment. But to your point, a healthy gut microbiome and a healthy individual has the highest chance of preventing these things from ever happening.
Yep.
And so I think that should be most people's focus of is to never get into that disease state in the first place.
I agree completely. It's so difficult. I was having this conversation last night actually that most people, even though they know that their health isn't good, won't do anything about it until they reach like a crisis, right? Like you
Sure,
might know that you're eating fast food, you're not exercising, you're not sleeping very well, but until you have a heart attack, you don't change your lifestyle. And it's like it it's hard that it has to get that drastic. Like it's hard to see that like with the general population, like something like that has to trigger change, but sometimes I wonder, like, what could we as coaches do better to help encourage that? And I think we do the best that we can in that regard. But it is just like a question where I'm like, why don't people want this change for themselves before the disease happens or before something occurs?
sure. I think that inherently, majority of us are procrastinators by nature. Um, I think that in at least talking about modern day 2024, we all are so overwhelmed and being hit from so many different angles with information, misinformation, doomsday information, and all these different things that it's just like, I'm just trying to survive the day. I can't even think about next month, next year, etc. So like that when that final thing happens, they're like, now I have to deal with it. Whereas last week I
Right.
didn't have to deal with it yet. So it's kind of like that wake up call right in the face finally. But um but yeah, I mean, I think it's important that, like you said, with regards to coaches, we are the educators, and we are there to kind of provide that knowledge on the forefront, asking the right questions in
Yep.
their initial intake forms, asking the right questions in their weekly check-ins, not being afraid to be like, "Hey, I think something's up here," you
Mhm.
know? I think some coaches are scared to rock the boat because they don't wanna lose the client or
Yep.
deal with that argument. Maybe they're not confident enough in their own education to really provide a proper argument as to why the person needs to address these things. I think there's a lot of reasons, but I think at the end of the day, not trying to speak for most people, but just in my experience, we are all so overwhelmed that we can only see so far in front of us.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately where we are.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I agree. I'm the same way. Like, there are some days where it's just like you're so overwhelmed, you're not making the choice that you should be or you could be, but it's just like, "Hey, I'm trying to get through the day." Um, I guess what general, like, lifestyle type recommendations could we give that are maybe more of those low-hanging fruit? Like, what can we tell people to walk away with today that's gonna help them with keeping their gut healthy, keeping them functionally healthy?
Mhm. I think sleep is the most underrated aspect to health optimization. Um, you know, Years back, they did studies that showed that the human body needs exactly 8 hours and 15 minutes every single night to basically recover from yesterday's stress load. So, for every hour that we're missing, we're now accumulating past stress onto current stress. And so, knowing that, we can basically assume, well, that's why most Americans are so fucked up because nobody's getting that much sleep. And that's even more true with women. On average, women need 1 to 2 hours more than men because their health is so reliant on their adrenal function
Mhm.
compared to men. When we look at adrenal fatigue, it's safe to say that most adrenal insufficiency or adrenal dysregulation cases, it's probably 5 to 1 women to men, 5 times as many women as there are men.
Yeah, definitely.
And one of the big issues there is because most of women's endocrine health is directly tied to adrenal function, whereas men is not, They have 10 times as much testosterone. That helps them combat cortisol. So technically, they are more resilient to physical stress.
Mhm.
And they can handle a couple days of poor sleep, a couple days of less food. A woman's body from a nature perspective is the main priority of a woman's body is fertility. When we think about nature's simplistic forms,
Mhm.
so everything that the woman's body is considering internally is right now an opportune time for fertility. And even though a lot of women may not care about fertility, when we're talking about the term fertility, we're talking about hormone health. And when we're talking about hormone health, we're talking about mental health, metabolic health, everything, immune system health, neurological health, and cognitive function. So I think sleep is super underrated. And why I put that emphasis first is because it's free.
Yep.
It doesn't cost us anything to get more sleep. Now, easier said than done from a lot of people because of their jobs and stuff like that. But at least if we have the knowledge that lack of sleep is what's hindering us, we can at least take some steps to try to improve that? So I think that's by far one of the best and easiest low-hanging fruit items.
Yeah,
From
something that
there,
I've been telling my athletes actually is like, I know that we want the 8 hours, but if they're a busy mom or if they can't get the 8 yet, I just say, "Let's get consistent with your sleep and wake times." Because
yes.
even setting that strict, like, circadian rhythm for themselves, I've seen a lot
Right,
of benefit from that, and then, we start to try to stretch it by like, "Okay, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here," like, push your bedtime back,
right.
just to try to get you do wanna get the extra sleep, but I think the consistent wait like, sleep and wake times, that's been a game
Yeah.
changer for a lot of my athletes.
Yeah, they call it a rhythm for a reason. You
Mhm.
you need to be within rhythm on a consistent basis. Some of the most fucked up people we encounter are night shift people.
Yeah.
Nurses, doctors, police officers, firefighters, military. These are the people with the most fucked up systems because of that lack of circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
And one of the most common things that I do with night shift workers is basically teach them that they have to adopt a vampire lifestyle. If you're going to be working during the night, you need to be sleeping during the day and awake at night. You can't have best of both worlds and be awake day and awake nights.
Yeah.
That just
Doesn't
doesn't
work.
work. And so that's oftentimes something I'm doing with them to help with that. But obviously there's a lot of situations where because of where they currently are in life, kids, work, they can't get 8 hours of sleep. And my statement to them would be, if you can't get 8 hours of sleep, what we then need to do is change our expectations of what we're accomplishing during the time that we're awake.
Mhm.
Meaning 5 hours of sleep and then doing a triathlon is probably not a good idea,
Yep.
you know? So if we aren't getting adequate sleep, we now need to change our expectations for the day and try to not drive our body further into the ground. And I think that's where people really start losing ground, is because they don't change their daytime habits and they don't change their nighttime habits. And it's just worse and worse and
Yeah, you
worse.
just burn the candle at both ends at that point. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and those are 2 things that everybody has access to, and it's free. You
Yeah.
can try to get more sleep, and you can manage your own expectations of what you can do throughout the day. So, I love
Cool.
those. I think that those are basic, simple, and probably couldn't be overstated because people often miss those.
Yeah, and it's gonna help them be succeed in the other aspects of their life. You know, you're gonna show up
Oh,
for
yeah.
your family and kids better. You're gonna show up for your work environment better. You're gonna be more successful, you know. You're gonna accomplish more each day by getting that rest and stuff like that. So, it's not like we're saying be less productive. In fact, by getting more sleep, you're more productive. It's proven.
Yeah.
So like it's all going towards that same idea of why we take rest days as athletes, because we're it's productive towards our goals.
Yes.
And I think that the mindset side of that is also important. 5 years ago, everyone was basically like, team no sleep, suck it up and just fight through it. We've quickly realized that was terrible advice. Most of the people given that advice are either dead or very dysfunctional. So we've learned from that since then. But it's still a very common habit that people fall into. But that's the benefit of, I think mindset coaching has become big in the
Mhm.
past few years. Even if your bodybuilding coach might not be super into the Zen and health side of things. Well, you might need multiple coaches that
Mhm.
you need support systems for every aspect. And it's not really fair to assume that you're the bodybuilding coach taking you to the Olympia is also your mental health coach. Like you probably need a couple different specialists to handle all those aspects.
Yeah, a couple different people in your corner,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
I mean, even from a functional perspective, I do dive into mindset and mental health work and stress work a lot. But some people come to me and based on their intake forms, history of trauma, whatever's going on in their lives, I straight up say, like, hey, sometimes it takes a village. This all can't be handled by me. We need to bring in an outside resource to handle the mental side while I handle the physical and physiological side.
Yeah.
And as a team, we're gonna see way more success.
I love that, and I think that that is becoming, more popular. Like, I've
Yeah,
had friends who and, like, teams that I know of that they have mental health professionals that they, keep on retainer. Like, they have them consult with their athletes, so they're getting both the mental health coaching that they need and the support that they need on the mental side, and they still get to work
yeah,
with the coach that they love. Yeah. That is huge. I'm definitely
exactly.
somebody who's very big into the mental health side of things as well. I think that that's important for every athlete. But there are times when you're like, this is a little bit out of my depth. Like, I think you need to talk to a professional. And at that point, it's nice to have, uh, it's nice to be able to provide them like that feedback too, because sometimes they don't realize, like, sometimes they don't know that, like, oh, I might actually need to go talk to a professional about this. Um,
Yeah, sometimes, just saying like, "Hey, we need to work on your mental health." If that's all you're giving them, that's creating more stress because now it's like, well, where do I start? Like, what do you
Right.
mean I need to work on this? I don't have time for that, you know? So giving them like an actual solution of like meet with this person, have a couple sessions, see how it goes. We typically see progress that we wouldn't have seen previously.
Yep. Yep, 100%. Well, we are coming to a close here. Is there anything, that we haven't touched on yet that you wanna talk about?
Um, one thing comes to mind, just kind of rewinding a few comments that we made back, talking about fear around foods
Mhm.
and eating disorders. One thing that I'm very careful of these days, as when we're treating people with GI issues, there are very specific diet factors that go into that. And just like in competition prep, the immediate thought is you guys are restricting what I can eat and taking away all the things that are good that I'm emotionally attached to. So there's this very negative connotation around contest prep dieting,
Mhm.
gut health dieting, if you will, and stuff like that. The idea of restrictive dieting as a whole, and you said it, post show, what do they say? I am done being restrictive. I want freedom with my food. Okay, well, let's backtrack that. You've created a negative thought process around that diet
Yep.
because we're using the term restrictive. However, I don't use the term restrictive anymore. When I tell people that we have to change up their diet to fix their gut, I use the term very specific diet strategies. Diet strategies is putting a positive connotation on it.
Right.
Diet restrictions is automatically putting a negative connotation on it. So, diet strategies, why are we doing this? We're avoiding inflammation, we're avoiding discomfort, we're making sure that these things are easy to digest and process, which is going to allow for the most successful week to week progress. And that's true whether we're talking about contest prep or healing a gut.
Yeah.
So, simply, this is more so from a coach's perspective, but also the athlete's mindset. If we can reframe their thought process as to why we're doing these diet strategies, maybe we can put a more positive spin on it.
Yeah.
And that will then take away this, I can't eat this,
Mhm.
or I can't wait till I can eat this again.
Right. I love that so much. It's a reframe of the perspective, and also like
For me,
strategies implies that they have control, right? Like restriction is like you cannot have this, and strategies is like, hey, you still have autonomy of choice here. Like this is a strategy that we're using. So I really,
yes.
really like that a lot. That's a good, I'm gonna steal that.
Yeah. It's yours to have. I hope that helps people because I know a lot of people uh have trouble getting their head wrapped around the idea of
Mhm.
why they can't have certain things for a certain period of time. I'm also very careful with explaining to everyone that if we are doing diet strategies, it's temporary. It's not lifelong.
Yep.
It's kind of like if you break your ankle and the doctor says you can't run for 8 weeks. Nobody's freaking out about that because, duh, I can't run on my broken ankle. But after 8 weeks, I
Right.
can.
Yep.
So it's the same idea. Like we just have to do this for a short time, get you through this, and then you're back.
Right. Yeah, and it's a lot less daunting,
Yeah.
and yeah, I like that a lot. That's a good note to end on. I like it.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, well, I think that this was awesome. We got to talk a lot about how, like, gut health plays such a central role. It's very interconnected into different areas of our body, and I also like how we kind of touch on maybe one area like the gut can have so many cascades of effects in different areas of life. So just understanding like health is very complex and it's
Right.
always interconnected.
Mhm.
I think it's just important to get that information out and have people start to understand how it is all connected.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really
No,
appreciate it.
thank you for having me
Um,
back.
we should definitely do it again because we had a lot more on our list to talk about, and I think If you'd like to, I think next time Matt and I could talk about how the gut plays into sex hormone and thyroid conversions or
Love
thyroid
that.
dysfunctions, and then food allergies, sensitivities, and intolerances, because I think that those would be really interesting to get into as well. Um,
I think those are big topics that will really shed some light on, what people may be going through, if they are dealing with issues, but also just like we talked about, preventing future issues.
mhm. Yep. Prevention, being proactive, getting embodied. I think those are all really key. So cool.
Definitely.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, share with a friend, and I will see you on the next episode of Becoming Relentless.